And as we prepare, I don't want to miss the fact that we are still in Pentecost. We are at the end of the longest season called Pentecost. So, in contemporary church, not a lot of people follow the lectionary or the church calendar or the liturgical calendar. So I wanted to give you an update of when I'm talking about this week by week and month by month so that you know what I'm saying. And I want you to get a context for it in God's world. In God's world. The lectionary and the liturgical calendar are creations of the church and people. Do y'all understand that? Now, God didn't sit down and write down that this would be Advent and this would be Lent. The church came up with those themes. But they move in a way that moves with God in the changing of the seasons. They're very much tied to festivals and celebrations that are thousands and thousands of years older than the church itself. Okay? And so we don't call it Saturnalia. We don't call it by the names that other people knew it by, solstice or the spring festivals. We have different names because we are telling the story of the church and of the church's master, Jesus Christ. And so as we tell the story through the liturgical calendar, I want you to understand how it's tied to God's world and God's calendar. So it looks like this. By the way, that big red word, liturgical, I'm giving you a freebie there. You can learn to say that and know what it means now. It's the liturgical calendar. Some of you have that background. You're going, yeah, we know. The first season in the church calendar is Advent. It is not Epiphany, which happens after January the 1st. It is Advent. It is the season that begins on the first Sunday following Thanksgiving, mostly. But it always begins on the fourth Sunday prior to Christmas Day. So we spend the first season in the church's year in the month of December, primarily between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that is the season of Advent, and it is a season of waiting, in anticipation. And it begins in darkness. Do you understand that? It begins in darkness with the creation of the world. From out of that darkness came everything. And it begins in darkness as the Holy Family is searching for a place to give birth to the Christ child, and there's no room in the end. It begins in controversy and rumor with Mary being pregnant. It begins in darkness. And then comes the second season after the longest night, after the 21st, after the time when the sun seems to disappear for the longest in our season, and we've all huddled together and cared for one another. Then after that longest night comes the wonder and amazement of Christmas. And it's not just Christmas Day, but it's Sunday after Sunday in the Christmas season, which leads us to the Lenten season, to Epiphany. Epiphany is in the beginning of the winter months. Epiphany also is in the dark months of the year, January and February. And Epiphany means literally learning or enlightenment. Isn't it interesting that enlightenment comes not in the celebrations, in the joys of Christmas and the wonder and amazement, or in Easter, but it comes in a dark and uncertain period of the calendar. Isn't that the way all learning is, though? Isn't it always in our struggles, the darkness in our life, that we're learning things that become clear to us later? After Epiphany comes the Lenten season, which carries us through the wintry months and into the springtime. And the Lenten season, being 6 or 7 Sundays long, is a real time of preparation. It's a time when here as a community we rid ourselves of the things that talk about celebration, and we center down on the work that is coming up, and we prepare ourselves for that work, and we prepare the earth for the coming of Jesus Christ, just as we read about John the Baptist in those times. And then after Lent comes Easter, just in time for spring, when new life is popping up everywhere, comes the Easter season. And if you are someone who takes your living from the ground, or if you're someone like me who eats because someone takes their living from the ground, then this is the time to plant, or to be planted now, to have that work done. And we move from Easter into the long, long season of Pentecost that carries us through the summer months when there's work to be done. And it carries us through the summer into the fall and to the time of harvest. As the Pentecost season comes to an end, we are seen at harvest, bringing in everything that we have worked for the year. We are right now, on this 8th day of November, in that season of harvest. It's not Advent yet. And, you know, it is Pentecost, but the work of planting and the work of cultivating and the work of watering and all of that has been done. And actually, the harvest has happened, and we are now going through the storehouse, and we are counting what we have from our efforts for the year, and we are looking forward to how we will manage those resources in the year to come. That's what we do next week, you know. The leadership team here has been doing that for weeks. We've been meeting over the budget, and we've been talking about the next year to come and how we will fund our outreach ministries and the ministries of formation and education that happen here inside and all the fellowship that we share over the next year. We're looking ahead right now. This is that season to bring it all into the storehouse and say, here it is. We've worked and we wait. We wait in wonder and amazement, and we wait to see now what God will do with everything that we've brought in. Because you know what the Bible says? That we do our work, but it's God who's building the house. Unless God is in this labor with us, we have labored in vain. If God is not in it, all the money we can put away and all the food we can put away will run short. If God is with us, and in this as we wait, we will see what God has us to do with everything we brought in. I want you to concentrate today on one thing with me as we come back to Ruth's story. Between the harvest and between Advent, between the harvest and between the time of waiting when we center down for the long, cold darkness, there is a short season in our culture that we call Thanksgiving. It's not that other cultures or people as old as those in the Bibles had a holiday called Thanksgiving, but they all had a time of gathering around that harvest similar. And it always looks something like what we call Thanksgiving. It's a time when people get together around the table, and they fill every place at the table, and where there is an empty spot, they take note. There will be empty places at the table this year. Some are to be remembered because they've gone on, and some are to be celebrated and always to be missed. Some empty places at the table will be because we have work left to do. There are people who we have alienated from ourselves and people who have alienated us from them. Sometimes the empty seat at the table means that there are prodigals in the family, and that we, as the older brothers and sisters, must pray with the Father for the return and prepare ourselves to greet, to welcome. Because you see, at God's table, there's a seat for everyone. It's not Thanksgiving if there aren't pilgrims and Indians in the picture. It's not Thanksgiving if there aren't Indians and pilgrims in the picture. You know, the story we read today is Ruth's story. This is how Ruth, the Moabite woman, came to be a part of the family of Jesus Christ. An ancestor of David, who was the ancestor of Jesus of Nazareth. So while telling Ruth's story, what we're really doing is we're really telling David's story. It said so in the very last of this, that he became the father of Jesse, who became the father of David. And bang, there's the point of the whole story. I told you all of this so you would know that this is David's family. And what a great story. It's full of all the things that the people in my family worked really hard to keep me from finding out when I was a little kid, you know. The first uncle who lived with a woman out of wedlock. Boy, that was controversial, and I didn't know because I got to tell you, they were everybody's favorite aunt and uncle. We found out many years later after they'd been married for 30 years. But some of the folks in the family had a hard time with that rough start. And that was okay for a while until somebody in the family got pregnant as a teenager outside of wedlock. And then there was a shotgun wedding, and I didn't even know what a shotgun wedding was at the time, but now I know. I remember that event. I remember that little baby being born who's like 40 years old now and has a baby 19 years old of her own. Whew, where did the time go? And that was a controversy in my family until one of the young women in our family, one of my cousins, had an intimate relationship with a black man. Ooh, man, you don't think they went to sweeping that under the rug? If my family reunion is the story of Ruth, then everybody at my reunion is saying, yeah, old Boaz got that Moabite woman pregnant, so. But you know what God did with that? She was the great-grandmother of David. That makes her an ancestor of Jesus. In other words, at God's table, there's a seat for everyone in Israel. There's a seat for everyone in Moab. Really? Well, it's not Thanksgiving if there aren't Indians and pilgrims in the portrait, right? They didn't miss that. It's not Thanksgiving if there aren't pilgrims and Indians. Am I saying that right? Native Americans. At God's table, there's a place for everyone. And the story of David, or the story of Israel, is a story of how God keeps his promise to Abraham when he says, you will be a blessing to all of the earth. If you keep doing the ancestry, what you'll find out is that everybody in the whole region ends up at the table. This frustrates purists, you understand. It did in that day, it did in the 20th century, and it will now. It's not our job to decide who belongs at the table. It's our job to recognize when the seat is empty and to say, someone is missing. Someone needs to be here to complete the family and the picture and to complete the story of God. Well, you'll gather around your tables this year, and you'll have your story, and I'll have mine. I just came home from being with my father, and he was ill, and I was with my sister and my brother, and the first time in a very long time, all three of us were in one place together. We lived thousands of miles apart, and it just thrilled my mother and my dad. It was a great time to be together, and you'll have those times too. And we're very fearful that next year when we gather that someone may not be there. And so we anticipate what hopefully won't come true for several years. But it's time for you to gather with your family and to tell your stories. We tell ours. We tell ours. The biggest part of my story that you know is that I'm from up there, Tennessee. When I get up there, the biggest part of my story is there's Doug. He's a Texan, you know. And then there's our story, this community of faith. This community of faith that is not limited to this congregation or these walls, but how we live in community in the places we work, in the places that we take leisure and invest ourselves around the community. I didn't ride in the Toys for Tots ride yesterday. I don't own a motorcycle, but Wyatt rode, and I was there right alongside Wyatt. And so it is, as your stories begin to emanate out into the community, it eclipses my story, and it becomes our story. But then there is not only our story, but there is the story of God. When Israel tells the story of their nation, one kinsman at a time, they are telling you the story of God among their people. You know, that's the difference in history and reading the Bible. History tells us what happened in our past. But in the Bible, when Israel talks about their past, they talk about where God is in their story, as best as they know it. as best as they can tell it. And that is our story. Your story, my story, our story is the story of God. I wonder if we're aware of that. And I wonder if we are telling the story in that way. I wonder if we know that when we encounter people, they know something about our God by their encounter with us, because our story is the story of our God. Well, you don't get to pick all your family. And sometimes you pick people that you do share with. But however we came together, here we are. At this point in history, we stand at a season of harvest. Our lives have been invested together over the last year and over these 100 years together. And so we sit now and we wait to see what God will do with all of these wonderful resources. I only encourage you that this season, enjoy your story and share it with everyone you can. And always give glory back to God, for our story is God's story. And all thanks be to God. Amen. Will you pray with me? Well, God, we thank you for the Bible that shares with us real stories of people who have anticipation and anxiety, who have fears, who make plans, who take action, and then who are blessed because you put your touch to their own